What is up, everybody? Welcome to Life Sucks, Let's Fix It, a podcast series born from multiple friends' advice to be the change that I want to see. My primary motivation in starting this podcast stems from two key beliefs. First, that I reject the notion that every podcaster, simply by picking up a microphone and discussing their interest, is inherently foolish or, uninformed. I have observed a tendency of people dismissing podcasters, especially when serious topics are involved, as lacking any real understanding. And while yes, I will admit that there are some individuals that do express absurd ideas and aim to shift public perception into a negative ideal towards people of certain demographics, personally, I wanted to create one to more or less share my opinions on the world. And if someone does share truly offensive content, they definitely deserve to face criticism. Because, well, I feel like that's the only way people in life can genuinely grow, is by being criticized, taking that criticism, and growing from it. However, the main problem with people's opinions on podcasters lies with individuals who obviously say incredibly foolish things, and when confronted, assert that their opinions are, immune to change, and that they shouldn't be changing at all. Which leads to my second point, that of course being online discourse as a whole and people's unwillingness to change. Many people are very reluctant to admit when they're wrong or acknowledge a better way to express themselves. And this rigidly often stems from a belief of unwavering self-authenticity. A good message in and of itself, but one that can very easily be taken to an extreme where individuals refuse to grow in any way, shape, and form, even if their actions harm others. They may believe their current behavior is immutable, and dismissing anyone who suggests otherwise as a problem. A perfect example of this, of course, being Fresh and Fit and Andrew Tate. Individuals who had been completely up their own asses about a lot of stuff. Same thing for pretty much most of those movie podcasters like Critical Drinker and AZ or whatever. Basically, if these people had actually been willing to change and grow, then they probably wouldn't have created the idiotic perception of podcast bros that seems to be setting an incredibly low bar for what many expect from such content creators. Therefore, I am here to share my opinions on social topics and hopefully understand better ideas about them as well. Basically, I believe that it is crucial to understand that these are my current beliefs, and having grown since started making TikTok videos at the age of 18, many of my past opinions have definitely changed. I'm actually privatizing a lot of my older TikToks, not because I'm ashamed of them, well, kind of because I'm ashamed of them, but also because they no longer reflect who I am. And while some argue that keeping them up public will show how I've grown, unfortunately, in online culture, people are rarely interested in witnessing people actually grow and become better individuals. If you make a mistake and hurt someone, a lot of people are unwilling to follow your journey of change, even with significant effort demonstrated to the public or anyone else. People often remain unconvinced simply because they just don't care, and they'll latch onto one negative take and define you by it. While I strive to not be swayed by such perceptions, I want to avoid misrepresentation due to older videos and youthful remarks. Most of my 2021, 2022, and some of my 2023 videos will be private because they just don't align with who I am as a person anymore. And for anyone questioning any of the content that I do leave up, I am definitely prepared to make fun of myself and critique my older views. Especially if I don't agree with them, obviously. So yes, my main purpose of this podcast is to share my current opinions and perspectives on modern issues, practically those I feel strongly about, and I want listeners to understand my present thoughts and emotions, rather than drawing conclusion from 2-year-old TikToks. I also want people to visit my TikTok page to see my recent content, or listen to this podcast, and think about what I'm, doing now as a person. I am to dispel any misconceptions of me, even though I know that's probably not going to really work, because let's just say a lot of individuals are most likely going to judge me based on whatever the hell they feel like they're going to judge me based on. And realistically, random people on the internet's judgment of me won't really be the greatest offense to me as a person, and will definitely lead to a lot of people writing me off as nothing but a complete and total asshole. But at this point, I'm here to present myself, and that's about it. I feel like I probably didn't need to say all of that in 5 minutes, but I just wanted to let people know who I am is what this podcast is. And trust and believe that just because I say something in one episode does not mean I am not willing to backtrack those statements or change them in future episodes. So anything I say today, I could easily change my mind on in the future. You never know. Which is where today's podcast episode is going to be talking about the opposite of misogyny and racism, which is, of course, misandry and reverse racism. Although I really do think it should just be called racism because, well, that's kind of what it is. Now, you might be wondering why I'm focusing on these rather than the more commonly discussed forms of prejudice, and it's simply because, well, they are constantly discussed. There's literally nothing I could add to the whole misogynistic shit is bad and racist shit is bad. Like, I don't really think there's anything I can add to that discussion in any way, shape, and form, because yes, I'm the type of person who, if I see one of my homeboys say something incredibly sexist about a woman in a non-joking manner, sometimes even in a joking manner, I would be like, yo, cut that shit out. That's messed up. Stop it. Get some help. Yeah, but like, I will definitely be willing to call that shit out when I see it. Same as if I end up basically seeing, like, you know, someone being outwardly racist or having a very, you know, racial opinion about someone that's obviously not okay, because you should not have any racist opinions about anybody whatsoever. That's fucked up. So yeah, I'm the type of person that can and will call out racist behavior and sexist behavior when I see it. And I know for a goddamn fact that there really isn't anything anyone can tell me about misogyny or racism that I personally would not agree with, unless your opinion is it's okay to be misogynistic and racist, which of course it isn't, because that's fucking stupid. But of course, I genuinely believe that while, yes, these are important topics and are some of the biggest topics in the world, talking about the opposite of them should also be discussed in some of these conversations. Obviously not all of them, and definitely shouldn't take, you know, center over the other conversations. But I don't feel like people should ignore them, or even to the point act like they don't fucking exist. Case in point, I'm gonna talk about the reverse racism, you know, more than misandry, because as a black man, I feel like I am more qualified to talk about racist individuals, and not so much misandry, because a lot of people are under the impression that just because I am not a woman, I shouldn't be talking about topics of misogyny or feminism in the first place. And while I do understand that perspective, I also believe your background shouldn't stop you from sharing your ideas or opinions on a specific topic. What really matters is whether or not your opinion is well informed, and whether or not, you know, it's actually makes some genuine sense. Because while obviously someone of a different demographic or group will never grasp the experience of another group, that does not necessarily mean they can't learn from that group or form a genuinely understandable viewpoint based on what has happened to this specific group. You know? Like, I genuinely do believe that that is something that I can talk about, which is why I am going to talk about it. I'm just not going to, you know, start. So, I do want to make it clear that I do technically identify myself as a feminist, because to me, I genuinely believe equal treatment for everyone, women, non-binary folk, trans people, men. Like, it's about gender equality, and again, since I believe in gender equality, that by definition makes me a feminist. I even fight for gender equality. When I see women being treated like shit in the video game space, I think it's fucking stupid that type of shit happens, because so what? They're a woman. Oh my god, women exist. Maybe you should stop treating them like crap. Same thing if I see someone saying that women only belong in the kitchen or some crap like that. I'm like, dude, shut the fuck up. You're being a complete and total idiot. That's fucked up to say. Like, obviously. But when it comes to racism, I have actually experienced racism in my life, and I know when I can see it. And when it comes to reverse racism, which I'm just going to call racism because that's what it is, it's basically just people being racist and doing racist things or having racist thoughts, but not wanting it to be labeled as such because they don't want to be lumped in with the group that they consider their oppressors. Because, see, racism by definition is when an individual, a group, or an institution shows inherent prejudice, hatred, or fear towards someone based on their skin color, race, or heritage. Yes, that obviously is racist. And remember, that "or" is super important here. Because when an institution, like the government, puts a system in place that is inherently prejudiced against black, Mexican, Irish, or any non-pure-blooded white people, as Peter Griffin would say, that is systemic racism. However, a lot of black people, even in my own family and friends, will actively believe that systemic racism is the only real kind of racism. But that's not inherently true. Hell, some will even take it a step further and say that community can be racist as well, because communities can build institutions and stuff like that. And I definitely agree that that is a form of systemic racism. And I agree that systemic racism is huge. It's actually the main reason why I support teaching critical race theory in schools, because, and I know this is a bit of a tangent, but to break down critical race theory, I'm going to use an example that I heard on TikTok a long time ago. Unfortunately, I can't remember who like the OG video, but like, imagine building a hotel, and the hotel was built by a very ableist owner. So they designed it so that wheelchairs or people with wheelchairs or crutches can't get around easily. They demand specific dialects or IQs from guests, and intentionally serve food that people with, like mental disabilities or mental sensibilities can't eat, because they know, or just something that they know that people are highly allergic to. And years later, a new owner comes along and makes minimal changes. They adding barely functioning elevators, flimsy cardboard ramps, or, flimsy wooden ramps, and mostly just reheated and barely microwavable food if people, want other options that could better taste for their palate or something. Now simply swap the hotel for America and ableism for racism, and that is systemic racism. And while, yes, a lot of things have gotten better in America, there is still a fuck ton of things that need to change before America could generally be seen as a non-racist country. Because, yes, America is still a very racist country, and the racism here is awful. But a lot of people forget that being a victim of racism, even systemic racism, doesn't let you off the hook for being prejudiced against someone based off their race. That kind of prejudice is, by definition, racism. When a black person is violent, angry, or says offensive things about Asian, Mexican people, that's racist. Same goes if an Asian person is doing it to, Mexican or black people. Same thing if you are simply treating other people differently based on their race. That is a form of racism. It's individual racism. And I feel like a lot of people often consistently refuse to call individual racism, and they'll say, oh, I'm not racist, I'm just prejudiced, is inherently ridiculous, because treating someone poorly based off their race is inherently racist. I feel like that's like basic fucking logic to some people. And I get that different cultures have different beliefs, and it's totally fine to talk about them or disagree with them, but intentionally making stereotypical Asian or black jokes, even if you are a minority yourself, is inherently racist. And I guess jokes might not be the best, but like if you're deliberately trying to present these jokes and not in a lighthearted way with another person of that, race, but like you're actually like just doing it with your homeboy saying, yeah, all Asians are bad drivers, or all Mexicans drink is tequila, and you're like actually presenting that as like a normal fucking thing, then yeah, that's kind of bad. Like, for example, in Tim Game Boys, me and Nico make race jokes all the time. Like, we constantly do. It's fucking hilarious. But there's nothing bad-hearted or poor, or like, there's nothing bad about it. We're not doing it to make each other feel bad, and we're not doing it because we're inherently racist. We're doing it because we're joking between friends. But when someone else starts making those kinds of jokes and actually start implying that this is how they actually feel about people, that's kind of fucked up. Yes, and again, I do agree that, again, the main reason why people argue that you can't be racist towards even white people is because they hold all the power. While I do agree that white privilege exists and white individuals will get certain advantages just for being white, And yes, that is how the world works. While a white person might get to use their power to harm a black family, that does not necessarily mean that treating white people inherently is terrible, or telling your kids to avoid white kids, or treating your white neighbors poorly isn't inherently racist. It's a form of prejudice. And not all white people are racist. And when they are, it's usually pretty easy to spot. If you want to call out racism, you also need to be able to recognize it within yourself. And a part of me thinks that we could actually take out the fear aspect of the racism definition, because everyone is going to be naturally cautious of the unknown. And I generally feel like, obviously, you're going to be cautious of someone when you don't know them. But when that goes into like full-blown hatred, or just full-blown being a piece of shit towards somebody simply because of their race, again, that is just a form of racism. And I am open to changing my mind on this, but when it comes down to it, I really do not believe that outside of the literal definition of racism, which actively makes it clear that individual racism is still racism, if somehow the definition changes in the next few years and it only starts to include systemic or community-based oppression, then I'm not really going to be able to change my mind on that. Because as far as I'm concerned, racism, by definition, is prejudice towards somebody based on their race. And if you have a prejudice towards someone based on your race, it is a form of racism. And I understand, and again, I will make it very clear that as a black man, this is something that even I kind of had to struggle with. Because a few years ago, I was the type of black guy that would be like, no, black folk can't be racist. We don't have any power. We can't harm white people in any way, shape, and form. And I get that. But I think that because black people know that we don't necessarily have the power to be systemically racist, that we also keep trying to separate ourselves from white people by saying we also can't have even a small inkling of their flaws, which is not true, because racism isn't just a white people flaw, it is a human flaw in general. Racism exists in countries where there aren't even that many fucking white people, okay? There's racism in India, there's racism in Africa, there's racism in fucking Asia. Racism exists everywhere in places where black people are not the fucking majority. And I know some people will say, oh, well, there's tons of black people in Africa. Yes, but they're also racist to other types of Africa. If I as an African American man went all the way to Africa and I tried talking to other African individuals, I'm pretty sure some of those motherfuckers would treat me like shit. There are tons of stories online of black people from America going to Africa and being treated like shit by Africans. That is a form of racism, because we're African American and they're from a specific part and they're like from Africa. And don't even get me started on the amount of people who have gone to fucking Asia and have just had so many bad experiences with those individuals. And experiences like that also exist in Spanish countries, because yes, a lot of Spanish countries, racism is the point is racism is a human flaw. Okay, that's really the point. And I think trying to remove racism from the individual can also take some kind of responsibility away from people who are genuinely racist, because it makes it seem like, oh, white people aren't racist because they're white or because they have this internalized idea. They're racist because their people like them have set up a system that makes it easier for them to live or something. And it kind of takes away the responsibility of that white person personally growing and changing as an individual so that they themselves don't do racist shit. You know? So yeah, that's pretty much my whole opinions on the whole reverse racism thing, or again, just racism. So now it's time to talk about the thing that I'm sure a lot of people are probably going to completely crucify me for later, which is, of course, misandry. Now, to some people, misandry just does not exist. It's the same way that a lot of people often say reverse racism doesn't exist. And to them, I simply have to say, well, if you have a prejudice towards someone because they're a dude, then yeah, no, that is misandry. And when I look at it, a lot of people often try and claim that misandry isn't as big or as much effective as misogyny is, and to that I say they are right. Misandry doesn't affect people the same way misogyny does, but it is still something that should be talked about, because I kind of noticed that a lot of people who are misandrist or who genuinely don't recognize the misandry that they have will oftentimes support and use misogynistic systems to hurt other men without realizing that the whole point of being a feminist or a feminist individual is to fight these patriarchy and misogynistic systems. Perfect example of this is, well, surprise, surprise, the family court system. A lot of, genuinely, I know a lot of people say, like, the whole cliche of bitter baby mamas and whatnot, but there are a lot of women out there who will take custody of the children away from men who would definitely be good fathers. A lot of children who will come out and say that, yeah, their fathers were great. They probably should have lived with them for a while or something like that. And again, it doesn't happen as much as people say it does, but it does happen a lot. Don't even get me started on false accusations and how, girlfriends or wives will falsely accuse their husbands or boyfriends of assaulting them or, raping them because they are just mad at them or they're pissed off, and they'll later admit that, yeah, they lied because they just wanted him to get in trouble. That is really fucked up. They know that the system, that there are ways that they can abuse this system, these misogynistic systems, and they abuse them simply because they want to. They don't use it to help other women. They don't even use it to help themselves. They use it to hurt people. And that's something I really don't understand. Because as a feminist individual, you are supposed to fight for gender equality on all fronts. You're supposed to tackle gender issues on all fronts. But when men are suffering from something similar to you, often by the hands of people who look like you, the last thing you should ever do in any situation whatsoever is treat the victims as if they're also a part of the problem. Which, lo and behold, is where we also get to the whole all men argument, which I don't agree with at all. Again, as I've said before, I'm logical to a fault, and logically, it is not all men. I say this because when I've talked to people on TikTok, Twitter, and even Facebook about this, I often ask if they include trans men or, men of different minority groups, and I usually get one of two answers. First one is no, they do not include trans men or men of minority groups because those men go through different experiences. And while yes, they will include some minority groups like black men and Latino men and even Asian men, they still acknowledge them as a different type of men and say that, oh, their inherent misogyny is a different kind. Which in that case, you're still not really including all men because you're excluding trans men from this. Meaning that there is a type of man that you will not include in this, and that for the most part, there are more differences in the different types of misogyny that men grow up with. And in some cases, those differences can easily be talked about and addressed in ways that you probably would not want to, actively talk about because you just don't care. You want to put all misogyny under the same blanket, and you want to put all men under the same blanket. And of course, I'll get to the second answer, which is when people say yes, they do include or talk about those types of men, because they also believe that when it comes down to it, misogyny in and of itself is something that every single type of man goes through, or they believe every man, no matter their experience, is inherently misogynistic. And I just have to say that that's not necessarily true. While yes, there will be guys out there who will unintentionally have thoughts and ideas that they should definitely learn from and constantly be better from, realistically, calling them all or calling every man misogynistic is kind of dumb, because there are tons of men who are fighting with you or who are genuinely active feminists who don't have a misogynistic bone in their body. They do not view women as different. They don't view women as completely different people. They view them as people like them. Logically and realistically, that is not a true statement. Now, obviously, I'm not referring to people who use the phrase all men non-literally, because there are people out there who will use the phrase all men, or who will say all men in general, because they're simply just referring to men in general or the patriarchy in and of itself. Which, you know what, in that case, fine, because you're not actually saying all men. But for the people out there who are trying to say it, As in, like, you literally believe every single man is responsible, or that men in general don't, or like all men don't understand consent and shit like that, or men don't get this, or men shouldn't have friendships with women and whatnot, then you're just like, you're just being illogical. And you're, what's even worse is that you're being incredibly counterproductive to feminism as a whole, because all you're doing is creating more division because of your own inherent prejudice towards men. Because look, I understand that you should be cautious of men you don't know, because again, we live in a system where bad men are able to get away with doing a lot of bad things. Okay, our police system and legal system is so fucked up that a lot of men are able to get away with literal murder, rape, and statutory and all that type of shit. But there are also a lot of women who will commit these crimes and will have male victims, and a lot of women will be completely dead silent about this shit, and then go around and claim that they're feminists who care about men and care about, well, not just care about men, but care about stopping this patriarchal system. When in reality, in order to truly stop patriarchal systems, you need to be able to tackle all of the issues that patriarchy creates. That includes women who have an inherent prejudice towards men and are willing to justify their girlfriends, slapping the piss out of their boyfriends, suing their husbands for their ex-husbands for stuff that they clearly don't need, and stuff like that. Because yes, stuff like alimony and child support, they're not there to actually help wives or to help, children. If they were, then they'd probably be a lot better, and they'd probably be used for actually helping children or helping wives in general. What these systems are in place, they're in place because misogynistic men who didn't think women could actively do much or believed women only had a specific role in society created these systems in an attempt to, better yet, keep women in certain positions and in certain roles. And nowadays, now that we know that that's not the case, a lot of feminists who claim to be women don't really give a shit when other women abuse these systems simply because these systems are created by men. Which sucks, because as a feminist, you should care about men. You should care about men's problems. You should care about the shit men go through, because they matter. Men matter to this society. We exist. We're people just like you. And when I hear or when I see videos on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook of people who claim to be feminists saying that men don't matter and that, kids don't need their fathers and shit like that, that kind of messes me up a little bit. That makes me feel awful, because why, as a feminist individual who's fighting for a better tomorrow, would you actively advocate for something that is genuinely harmful? And the reason is because of prejudice. It's because you have an inherent prejudice. And that inherent prejudice is towards men in general. It's not just towards rapists, it's not just towards misogynists, it is just towards men. And that prejudice towards men has a name. It's called misandry. And while yes, there are no systems in place that women have put in to make it more difficult for men, in fact, every single system that bad women use to abuse and take men down and treat men in general like shit was created by a man. I fully agree with that. But being okay with women taking advantage of those systems and not fighting against it makes you a part of the problem. Which leads to another big thing, that misandry often leads to more misogyny. It supports the systems that makes misogyny so damn strong. If you're not willing to call out your girlfriend when she, slaps her boyfriend for making an off-color comment and he gets arrested because she lies and says, oh, he hit her first, that's not okay. If you're the type of person that doesn't care when your girlfriend is obviously taking advantage of the family court system to basically screw over her husband, then that's not okay. Like, if you are the type of person that, doesn't believe a young boy is getting abused by his mother, or someone is getting abused by their wife or girlfriend because they're a man, or because, oh, you're too big to get abused, or, oh, you have to want it, then that's not okay. That's prejudice. And I feel like a lot of people forget that just because this prejudice was created from a system that they're also fighting, that does not make their inherent prejudice less of a prejudice. And I feel like a lot of women need to understand that it does not matter how your prejudice came to be, and it does not matter how much of a victim you are in this society. But victimizing other people and ignoring the things that they're a victim of is not going to help you. And it's sure as shit not going to help society get any better. So now that I've outlined these issues, the natural question would obviously be, how can we address them? How can we fix them? And personally, I believe solutions for problems like this is always fixable. Alright? In prejudice of any kind, I think the most significant step is to stop reducing individuals to initial perceptions. Alright? I feel like while obviously upbringing and treatment undoubtedly vary based on broad observable characteristics, every person is a three-dimensional human being. And treating people as individuals first and considering their race, sex, gender, or other attributes second allows for more accurate assessments of whether they are worth engaging with. And furthermore, the negative experiences with few individuals should never be an excuse to generalize and mistreat an entire demographic of individuals. It's socially unacceptable to treat people like shit simply because of things like their race or gender. And while yes, I do understand that in society, misogyny and racism are way more prevalent and definitely affect way more people, I don't think we should act like the opposite doesn't exist and also shouldn't be talked about. I feel like people are way too bogged down with the idea of just ignoring problems because they aren't as big as the other problems. And because of that, it kind of makes life sucks. So let's fix it. Thank you all so much for listening. If you disagree with anything I said, please be sure to leave a constructive comment in the comment section below, or reach out to me on TikTok or any of my other social medias. And hell, maybe we'll be able to have a conversation about it. So with all that being said, thank you all so much for listening. And remember, everything I say, everything I sing, and everything I play, I do it for love. Bye, guys.